been past this boat for several days now. Who would have thought that a boat in a classic regatta in the south of France would be flying the flag from the Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk?
The enemy attacked us on all sides with great strength and fierceness. 220 light warships and 650 other vessels were engaged, bringing with them always men whom they had rescued.
I got up to look out the window. It was almost like magic, and the whole harbour was full of little ships, and they were manned by elderly men, boys, but at least they were able to get onto the beaches in Dunkirk and transport the soldiers onto the larger ships. Quite astonishing, really.
In the late summer of 1939, an errant teenager, one of three troublesome brothers from Hull in Yorkshire, joined the East Yorkshire Regiment to help fight the Nazis as they swept across France and Holland, and also to distance himself from some local difficulties. It was a leap from the frying pan into a much bigger fire. This man was my great-uncle Tom, brother of my grandfather, Harry Fulshire. Even Tom's feisty character was no match for the Nazi blitzkrieg, and the entire BEF soon found themselves falling back to the French coast, and a strip of shoreline that will remain enshrined forever in the consciousness of the British people. With many of his comrades, young Tom waited on the Dunkirk beach for rescue. After 3 days in chest-high water, he was picked up by a small boat, ferried to a larger Royal Navy vessel, and brought back to England. He was never the same man again. He stopped drinking, became quiet, patient, and often withdrawn, spending many long hours gazing into the fireplace of his small house in Hull. He never spoke about the war. It was a closed book.
A miracle of deliverance, bringing with them always men whom they had rescued.
Operation Dynamo was, I think, one of the main epics of the war.
And yes, this boat has a history. This is living history at its best. Our cameras have caught up with several regattas, or voiles, along this coast. Curious to find out more about this boat and her story, I somehow got myself invited on board. They were standing by for VIPs, but the posh people got delayed, so that let me on. I'm on board and I am the VIP. Isn't that good? And it also helped that I recognised the accent of one of the ladies on board. The wife of one of the owners was actually born 2 streets away from me, in Hull, East Yorkshire, England. It's a small bloody world, isn't it? The grandson of the original owner, Colin Dimberlow, takes up the story.
Aquabelle was built in 1939 for my grandfather. He thought that it was a little short, so he had it extended by 5 feet to extend the wheelhouse, because he thought that's where people like to be, and that was a brilliant decision at the time, because we know now the wheelhouse is a very pleasant place to be. It was launched in April 1939. They enjoyed a big cruise before the war, which involved going to Calais and then along the south coast of England. They were in Poole Harbour on board Aquabelle when they heard on the radio that war had been declared. And in fact, she was up the Thames a little way from where they lived near London when the call from the Admiralty came to collect all the boats for the Dunkirk evacuation. They knew about Aquabelle and all others from what was then called the Thames Motor Cruising Club. They had the names of the boats already. So he was rung up and said, "We want your boat now, please." And my mother, who died only a few years ago, remembered vividly having to steer the boat through the blackout down to where they lived, near Teddington, for the Navy to take the boat away.
That's the speed of each engine. Is forward, neutral and reverse for each engine.
Before the Navy took the boat, my grandfather unscrewed the ship's bell and kept it just in case. About a week later, they heard that the boats had returned, but they were told, no, the Navy has requisitioned this boat, and so it will be used from now on. Of course, they don't know how long the war would be. We found from records that she was used on the east coast as a patrol boat. We are pretty sure she had a small machine gun on the foredeck, at least up to the end of 1941. She was then transferred to the War Office, but we are not sure of what happened between 1942 and 1945. Aquabelle was sold back to my grandfather after the war, but he only kept her for about a year. We know there were a number of owners in the 50s and 60s in England. She was in Poole, for instance, in the 60s. She was in Ramsgate in the 70s. 74, we think. She was taken to France by the lady owner of the time, some slight scandal associated, we think, and she was taken down through the rivers and canals of France and ended up near Marseille. And at some stage, she sold the boats to another guy, a French guy, who used her as a charter boat for maybe 20 years. But towards the end of that tenure, the boat was beginning to deteriorate. And although he sold the boat on to a Swiss couple, they quickly realised it was not safe to use and abandoned the boat on the Rhône-Asset Canal. At that point, a group of Frenchmen, recognising this boat had history and actually knowing a little bit about her from working on this boat during the previous ownership, decided she was too good to rot because they knew she had history and was a beautiful boat. And so they proceeded to form an association of volunteers to restore the boat, led by my friend Alan Aldrin, who really has been the focal point, the leading light of all this, all the organising and financing a lot of it as well.
We restore her, and we are keeping her as an alive part of our common story. That's very important. Even on the drawing, we discover that it is a cocktail cabinet. So it's why we have some alcohol, of course. We want to keep her as near as original as she was.
Yeah.
And but thanks to the original blueprint, we could restore as original, because it was plenty of things which were added, you know, like it was like a wings on the rear part. Oh yes, fortified part of history, which are really making the real history, because what we learned at school when we were young and today, history is completely different. But this is the truth. That's the truth. Yeah. That's what it is rare, and it is the weakest point. It is this pump here. You see, this it is with a piston, yeah. And it is the water pump to cool the engine. I am the engineer, and I am also the vacuum cleaner guy, like everybody here. But everybody noticed aquabelle, because you know Saint-Tropez, all this fantastic multi-billionaire yacht and so on. No interest. But this one, it was something coming from the past. You know, I don't know, something open in the time. You know, because the clock and the barometer are also original.
The film I mentioned, the ship's bell. I also had a blueprint. I had a lovely watercolour of aquabelle when she was launched. So I often wondered where this boat had got to. And my mother, in her 90s, always talked about this boat because she loved it. It was her favourite place to be. And so we started to see if we could find out where she was. In 2011, we found on the internet an email, a blog from the Friends of Aquabelle, Les Amis, in France, saying we are restoring this boat. We know it's called Aquabelle, we know it was a Dunkirk ship, we think it was owned by Benjamin Taylor, my grandfather. Has anyone any information? wow, you know, this was a turning point. And contact. And in 2012, we actually visited them, and I brought along all the stuff I had, and they organised an exhibition of the bits they'd taken off the boat, by that time supported by the local mayor. And we had a meeting and a coming together, which was very emotional. These guys were trying to restore this boat back to the 39 condition, but didn't know what she looked like, really. They didn't even know she had two masts at that time. And I brought this collection of photographs and films and everything, which was exactly what she was like when she was launched. And so we came together, and in fact, 2 years later, I was invited to become a co-owner with Alan, so I own a third of this boat, and Alan now owns 2/3. And at that point, I was confident enough about the enthusiasm, in fact, the love of this boat of our French friends, to return the bell to its position where it was removed, what would have been 76 years earlier.
The original aquabelle bell.
Took the boat from the Mediterranean to Ramsgate by lorry. Then we did the crossing. It was almost her maiden voyage after more than a decade of neglect and then restoration. So that was a bit exciting, but it was a privilege to be part of the flotilla, 50 Dunkirk ships. And we were welcomed royally at various places. We went up the Thames through London, and what an experience that was. Up to Henley-on-Thames for the Thames Traditional Boat Rally, with maybe 20 Dunkirk ships associated with that period, and then back to where the boat lives at Calabasas Flow near Montpellier. But he's been working extremely hard, getting the boat better and better each time.
This is an original from 1939. Paraffin or oil, paraffin liquid. So, and this is very clever because it's a chimney, but also depending you screw it or not, you know, you have more or less oxygen, and it is iron phosphorus. Yeah, no, but it's what we call it Aldis, yes, it's signalization for day and night. No, for the contrast.
And one of the results is we have been invited to come to the Voile d'Antibes, real privilege, and so the opportunity to show off this boat to people, to explain her history, to remember what happened in 1940, to educate maybe the children is a new role for her, and one which I welcome. That's very important to me. That's what I'd like to see, to make sure she exists many years into the future.
It's an absolutely gorgeous day out here. Fantastic on this boat.
They steal the heart of everyone who meets these boats, because we have made contact with the families of some of the previous owners, and almost without exception they have kept souvenirs of this boat, which they have given back to us in some cases. We have a copy of a ship's log that was kept by an owner in the 1960s, an owner in the early 60s, kept for many years through marriage and divorce even, one of the life rings and a sail. Listening to the story, they gave to me to return to the boat, and the life ring is actually in the wheelhouse now.
How does it feel to be driving the boat of your grandfather?
Yes, it's rather poignant. Especially we have a nice photograph of my grandfather standing here. It is rather strange.
After a marvellous few hours out in the bay watching the classic yachts and the Voiles d'Antibes, we took our own classic yacht back to port. Against a backdrop of magnificent super yachts, we brought our own piece of floating living history back to port in Antibes. Even if it did take a little bit of skillful handling by Alain to successfully dock her.
I was looking at the television programme about one of the Spitfire and how much the whole population loved these planes. Actually, aquabelle is older than that Spitfire. There is a lot more of aquabelle from that period than this plane in the sky. This boat experienced war, was shot at. There is no reason not to put this boat in the same cachet as a Spitfire. It is a relic of the Second World War, which becomes more important as the individuals who experienced the Second World War, and there are none left, and so you are only left with the artifacts of the Second World War. It's a remarkable effect that this boat has on people. It's been a fantastic story, and one I'm very proud to be associated with.
All boats grab your soul at some point, and all boats always have a story.